because the railroads apparently, or the railroad customers like us better. And over the long term, we'll see. But it isn't like it's something we can't do.
Yeah, here's the latest on the coronavirus. China reported an additional 150 deaths and 409 new cases overnight. South Korea raised its coronavirus alert to the highest level after the number of cases there ballooned from 31 to more than 750 in less than a week. Stocks in Asia falling overnight. Hong Kong's Hang Seng fell 1.8%. South Korea's Kospi fell nearly 3.9%. Shares of South Korea's two largest airlines down as they canceled flights to the city of Daegu, where many of the new cases were detected. Meantime, Italy's government is scrambling to deal with the biggest outbreak of the coronavirus outside of Asia. Stocks there were lower overnight. The government placed at least 10 towns in northern Italy under quarantine and canceled the last few days of the Venice Carnival. Elsewhere in Italy, schools, museums, universities, and cinemas were closed, and major soccer matches were canceled. At this point, I mean, Boris Johnson out earlier today, Andrew, saying that the risk to UK citizens just over there remains low. I would say that our officials would say that here too. The risk to the U.S. citizens remains low. But there's a significant difference between supply chain disruption, slowing dozens and dozens and actually hundreds of companies.
Absolutely.
And that's dampening global growth. What worries me is that we don't know 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. If it ever gets to the point where we start to see, in a lot of countries around the world, these breakouts where they don't even know the origin of some of these, and if they multiply like that, that's when I think it could really get. At this point, it's still a global growth slowdown. Nobody in most of the world is worried that they're going to catch coronavirus, and they can't go out and they can't, go to the movies or the health club or to a restaurant. But that I just wonder.
Look,
we don't know.
There are major travel that's being changed right now. Conferences are being canceled. There was an article in Time magazine speculating whether the Olympics in Japan over the summer will be canceled. So there's real implications here that could reverberate. Having said that, the farther we get to the spring, the better it gets in terms of weather. There's a whole sort of view about how the flu,
I was looking at some of Jim's tweets earlier. If you go too far with the fear and the panic, you're accused of one thing. If you don't go far enough, you're accused of the other thing. So we really just need to sit here and each day report on the facts and try to remain detached. But there's something about a pandemic that just is different than other black swans. It's a frightening prospect. Anyway, let's get right back to our guest of the morning. Warren Buffett joins Becky in Omaha following the release of his annual letter to shareholders over the weekend. Becky, you took a plane. I mean, it's in the back of our minds, is it not? It's just in the back. There's no way. And the risks are low.
Joe, it goes back to 1918. It goes back to 1918. If you look at the numbers of what happened in that pandemic when it came around the globe, up to 50 million people were killed in that. It was a third of the planet's population that was infected. It was 500 million people that were infected at that point. 675,000 Americans died at that point. So inevitably, your mind kind of goes back to what's happened in the past, because as humans, we always look back to history to try and predict the future. It doesn't always work. It's not always prophetic, but it does give you something of what to kind of play out if this were to get worse and worse. Now, Andrew brought up the idea that it's warm weather. We're approaching spring in a lot of parts of the country, or a lot of parts of the planet. That may be good news. We just don't know if this time around, if this is one of those viruses that does die off in warmer weather. Wait and see and kind of hope.
Yeah, actually, I think this, from what I've heard from people that know a lot more about viruses than I do, that unfortunately this will make it through the summer, and in terms of having a vaccine, it's a long ways off. So. You've got, it is scary stuff. I don't think it should affect what you do in stocks, but in terms of the human race, it's scary stuff when you have a pandemic.
Yeah, I guess this one's particularly frightening because it's new. So there's no natural immunity that's built up in any of the populations, and you wonder what happens, particularly in areas where there's not the same healthcare structure that we have in America or in some of the developed nations. I guess that's a big part of the question too.
Yeah. And Well, I think about it in terms of our annual meeting. I mean, which is May 2nd. I mean, it could very well affect, by that time, it could affect.
We got questions from viewers asking just that. Will the annual meeting be any different this year, particularly because you have a large Chinese contingency of shareholders who come here for that?
Yeah, and that certainly will be affected. And incidentally, I mean, flu is particularly tough on old people. Yeah, if you're going to have two guys on the stage whose combined age is 185, so we won't be looking for people that are showing any signs of contagion. But that's one of the problems with this, is it does have a long gestation period,
Right.
And it's highly transmissible.
And again, you did talk about it earlier. It's something that you see in the results of the businesses, even some of your own fully owned businesses that you didn't anticipate.
Well, and we own airlines, for example. No, it affects businesses. Now, actually, my dad used to tell me stories. He was 14 in 1918, and he told me what went on in Omaha, during the big Spanish flu epidemic. I mean, it was something in those days, and pandemics will occur in the future. Now, what they hope to get is a universal flu vaccine, but that's a long way off. It isn't impossible. I mean, I asked my own science advisor is Bill Gates, so I talked to him. I call him. I've talked to him the last few days about it, and he's bullish on the long-term outlook for a universal prevention of it. But he says it's not going to come, it's not going to be here in 10 years.
What are Bill's concerns as somebody who spends a lot of time traveling around the globe, as somebody who is trying to help medicine in some of the less developed parts of the world?
Yeah, the Gates Foundation is very active in trying to be helpful on this, and Bill says the CDC is the best in the world, and I mean, we've got terrific resources in this country, but a pandemic is a pandemic, and there's just no evaluating. But I have heard that the summer is not likely to cause the end of this.
Do you know why?
But I don't know, and you shouldn't be asking. I shouldn't be offering my opinion on that, because I pass along things I hear from people I think are smart, but
I'm actually asking for Bill's opinion, not yours.
yeah, well, I shouldn't really quote him, but I do. He's the guy I ask, and I did talk to him just a few days ago, and he loves to talk science, and he can make it so I can understand it, which is quite a trick. At the Gates Foundation, they're taking it very seriously. I'll put it that way.
Is money going from the Gates Foundation to try and find a vaccine?
I'm sure we're expending human and financial resources.
I mean, maybe this is more than you know, but do you know if they have put human resources out either into China or other places where there's...
I don't know that. I don't want to comment on that, but I know that that is something they've always spent. They've been very involved in, is human health, and even particularly this. Bill knows a lot about vaccines.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Berkshire Hathaway. We were in the middle of a conversation when we had to go to a break before, but there has been this question raised, not only by Barron's in the cover story there, but by other places too, about whether Berkshire Hathaway would be worth more if it were split up.
It's a good question, and I will tell you that if you were to say, and let's say the stock market didn't change for 2 years and interest rates didn't change, so you had a 2-year period, and you said, we'll sell off all the businesses. Mm-hmm. I don't think, I mean, you have the expenses of selling them. Now, if you sold them all to people who leveraged them up to their maximum, you might get a little more than the stock is selling for. It would be very tax inefficient, very tax inefficient. Interestingly enough, up till 1986, it wouldn't have been. I mean, there was a general utilities doctrine that governed corporate breakups, and so you could dispose of businesses or securities, if you did it right, you could dispose of securities or businesses that had appreciated without a tax at the corporate level. That was done regularly in various ways up till 1986. They revised the tax code big time. They killed general utilities. You can't do that now. Now you can have spin-offs, this business or that business. You probably have to lie a little in terms of your purpose in order to get the best tax ruling. And it takes time, but you cannot break up you cannot dispose of the entire business, business by business, without having very substantial tax liability. It would not produce a gain. On the other hand, having them together produces, there's some very valuable synergies in there. Now, we don't use leverage as much as the people who would buy them piece by piece would do. So we could leverage Berkshire up to the sky. I've promised people we won't, because we have insurance promises to people out 50 or 100 years, and we've got shareholders who are going to own the stock for 50 years, and they do not want us to leverage to the sky. But there would not be a profit if we were simply to announce that over the next 24 months that you could come in and buy any business we had and we'd sell them to the highest bidder.
You made a point of talking about this in